Gordon, do you remember this?
When the gap between the sacrifices made by people and the service they receive from politicians grows this big, it leads to a weariness in the heart of a nation, a draining away of the hope, the spirit, the belief in a better future, that we need to move forward together. Now, this wound, this lack of trust, can only be healed by actions, not words. I know that. But we can make a start today with the simple acknowledgement that public service is a privilege and that your government should treat every single person in this country with respect.
Keir Starmer, the day after being elected Prime Minister, July the 5th. That's all going very well, isn't it? He said he was going to turn the page. This was going to be a very different type of government. It's going to be transparent. It was going to be super, super honest. And since then, we've had broken promises on tax and borrowing. We've had rows about endless freebies, from glasses to suits to dresses to football tickets.
And Taylor Swift.
And now the first resignation. Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary, gone 150 days in. Just for comparison, the first resignation from Tony Blair's government was after 18 months. Now, Gordon, little quiz question. Can you remember who that was?
The first resignation from Blair?
Yeah.
It would have been probably Mandelson or Plunkett.
Almost. I think Peter Mandelson was the second. The first was the Welsh Secretary, Ron Davies, with his moment of madness on Clapham Common when he was threatened with a knife after meeting a man and agreeing to go for a meal. And I remember the first interview Ron Davies did about that, where he had scribbled sorry on his hand in case he forgot to apologise. It didn't save him. He resigned.
Yeah, Louise Haigh resigned less than 12 hours after the Times and Sky News reported that she has a past conviction for fraud. She was convicted 6 months before her first election to Parliament at the age of 26. And she had been a rising star of Labour's left. She was the youngest member of the cabinet. She's quite distinctive. She's the lady with the bright red dyed hair. And she'd been a bit of a nuisance for Keir Starmer, which we'll come on to later.
Yeah, she was a big fan of Jeremy Corbyn in the past and had survived, though, into the new government. Let's just go through, first off, Gordon, exactly what we know about what has happened. So between 2012 and 2015, she worked at the insurance company Aviva as a public policy manager. In 2013, Haigh claimed that she was mugged on a night out. She said that it was a terrifying experience, and she reported the mugging to the police along with a list of what she said had been stolen, including her work phone. And apparently this wasn't the first time she had reported her work phone missing or stolen.
Yeah, so Aviva began an internal investigation, and a little while later the phone that she said had been stolen was switched on. She says she found it in a drawer at home and that she should have immediately informed her employer, and not doing so straight away was a mistake. It seems that when she turned on the phone, that alerted either the police or Aviva to the fact that this phone was still around. She was brought in for questioning by the police. She says her solicitor advised her not to comment during that police interview, which she says she now regrets. And in 2014, she pleaded guilty to fraud by false representation, i.e. lying to her employer, at Camberwell Green Magistrates Court. She says, "This was a genuine mistake from which I did not make any gain. The magistrates accepted all of these arguments and gave me the lowest possible outcome available, which was a discharge. That conviction is now spent, which means it disappears from her criminal record, and she doesn't necessarily have to declare it on job applications."
So let's talk a bit about her political career, which started after she left Aviva. She was elected as MP for Sheffield Heeley in May 2015. And just to be clear, candidates are only disqualified from standing for Parliament if they've been sentenced to 3 months or more in prison. She was one of the Labour MPs who nominated Jeremy Corbyn for leader, and she served as one of Corbyn's shadow ministers, including, slightly ironically, shadow policing minister. In 2020, Louise Haigh was appointed by Keir Starmer, who was by then the new Labour leader. She was shadow Northern Ireland secretary, aged just 32. And then once Keir Starmer had won the election, she became transport secretary in July this year. And also one of the key controversies that she's been involved in is agreeing to give the rail unions inflation-busting pay rises. Now, on this issue of the phones and declarations and what she told Keir Starmer, she has said that she declared her conviction to the Prime Minister in full in 2020. So it seems that the Prime Minister has certainly known about this for over 4 years. But nothing ever publicly said. In her resignation letter, she said the story had become a distraction for the government. And then Keir Starmer, in a really oddly short letter back, said, "I know you still have a huge contribution to make in the future," although whether she actually gets back into government, I think at this stage is a pretty long bet. One just interesting detail, which you would imagine that Louise Haigh might have thought about before this whole thing became such a political disaster for her. She had previously worked as a special constable as part of the volunteer police force of the Metropolitan Police. Just to be clear, Aviva has declined to comment on the whole story.
All a bit difficult for Labour, Kamal. Anyway, let's have a clip of Louise Haigh before this all came out, setting the moral high tone on Question Time in March last year.
And I think it's important that Parliament proves that it can uphold certain standards in the House of Commons, and that you, the British public, know that when you elect people to that place and to represent you on your behalf, that people speak the truth and can be held to account when they don't.
So Louise Haigh there talking about the previous Conservative government and Boris Johnson. She tweeted as well pretty regularly about what was obviously some of the sleazy record of the Conservatives. She said, you can't make the rules, then break the rules. You can't have one rule for yourself and different rules for everyone else. Now it's time that the rules applied resign. That was to Boris Johnson. I think, Gordon, there are sort of three major problems here. The first one is it's not necessarily about the importance or otherwise of the mobile phone issue. Lots of people on the Labour side are saying, oh, this is really trivial. It was years ago. She was in her mid-20s. That might be all very well. The issue is transparency. The issue is you should have made it clear once this had been revealed internally in Labour, in opposition, that announcement should have been made. It should have been that this is what happened. We believe people deserve a second chance, or whatever it might be. She was very young. There was some confusion, etc., and let then the public decide whether they still believe that this person should be voted for, whether she should be in the shadow cabinet. But it's that lack of transparency, I think, is the first point. The second point is this issue around Keir Starmer being apparently aware of this when still in opposition. Why, therefore, wasn't an announcement made so the public could know about it? The high moral tone, frankly, as we heard from Keir Starmer on the day after the election, and this pattern of behaviour that it is only when journalism, often journalists, reveal issues around freebies, around dresses, around football tickets, around Taylor Swift tickets, that the government actually bothers doing anything, or Keir Starmer actually bothers doing anything. And that is why politicians keep saying, oh, we need to rebuild trust, Keir Starmer more than anybody. That is why trust is not being rebuilt.
Yeah, and I think people seeing the news today will be thinking to themselves, why has she had to resign if Keir Starmer knew about this all along? And I think that the problem for Keir Starmer is that those same people will be saying to themselves, if I was in his position and somebody disclosed this to me, and if I had been in charge of the Crown Prosecution Service and with the knowledge of the law that he has, would I not have asked a few more questions than he appears to have done? We now know from Downing Street that they are saying part of the reason that she's had to go was because she didn't tell him everything about what happened. As we said earlier, it appears that there were more than one incident that led to this. She was reportedly forced to resign from Aviva as a result of that. If her version of events was accurate, would Keir Starmer not have thought, well, why would she need to have resigned over that? And is there perhaps more to it? And there is this pattern with Keir Starmer that when there is a hot potato, conveniently he doesn't know anything about it. He didn't know about Mohammed Fayed being investigated by the CPS when he was DPP. He didn't know about Jimmy Savile. He didn't know about the Post Office prosecuting postmasters under his watch. He didn't know about the fresh evidence that came to light over Andrew Malkinson, who was wrongly convicted of rape. So all these times when there's something difficult, he knows nothing about it, never comes across his desk. And yet, he tells us that he can remember and looked into every single assisted dying case that happened while he was DPP. Whenever there's a terrorist conviction, he's there to claim credit. So he does have this credibility problem. He seems to be either very unfortunate or very incurious, and neither of which are very good qualities for a PM.
No, and he made it so clear to everyone, constantly saying, as the director of public prosecutions, that's why I'm a good person to run the government. And what we've seen in these first 150 days is that doing one job seems to be no qualification for doing the second job. The replacement's been announced already for Louise Haigh. Transport is a really controversial area. The government is putting in place a huge and very significant change in particularly railways. They're going to move from some have already moved, but they're going to move from private ownership to government, public state ownership, even though there's a lot of evidence, for example, Northern, which was brought under public ownership 4 years ago, the rail franchise in the north of England, and services have actually got worse since it's been under public ownership. But the government have made this a huge manifesto pledge. Great British Railways is going to be the new public owner, back to the 70s, public owner of the railways in the United Kingdom.
And you and I can remember when the railways were in public ownership and how bad they were, and the trouble is a lot of people can't remember that.
And so the new Transport Secretary is going to be Heidi Alexander. She's probably not known to that many people. She's certainly much more centre-right in Labour's world. She backed Andy Burnham for the leadership against Jeremy Corbyn. She actually served under Jeremy Corbyn very briefly as shadow health secretary. But such was her frustration at the way he ran the shadow cabinet, she actually resigned. I just dug out a quote from the days after she resigned. She wrote in the Guardian newspaper, "I hated being part of something so inept, so unprofessional, so shoddy. There was no effort to build a team. Good people recruited to his office soon left." I wonder whether Heidi Alexander might be writing something similar as she goes back into a cabinet now, not a shadow cabinet, because I think the transport debate is going to become harder and harder. If they don't get the railways to run better, but they're still trying to satisfy the unions in the railways and the huge costs, for example, to the significant pay increases that train drivers have been given, I think that's one of those big areas where it's going to become more and more controversial. The government believes that by pulling the lever of public ownership, the railways will get better. And I don't think that's going to happen.
No, and the other thing we haven't talked about is where did this story come from? How did people, who tipped off the media about it? And I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know is that this was something that the Conservatives were tipped off about before the last general election, the one this year. And they were looking into it at the time. They didn't manage to get to the bottom of it. But the impression I have got is that this originated from Labour circles. And so I think what we're looking at is an internal sort of hit job, if you like, on Louise Haigh. Why would that have happened? Well, because as you've sort of referred to, she has been, as well as being probably the most left-wing member of the cabinet, she has been a bit of a sort of troublesome priest, hasn't she? She famously urged people to boycott P&O ferries, call them a rogue operator. The P&O parent company then threatened to pull a £1 billion investment from the UK. That was only a few days ago. She's been accused of sort of overplaying her hand when she was settling the pay dispute with the train unions, perhaps give them a bit too much of a pay rise, which I think didn't go down too well with Downing Street. And in terms of the timing, why now? If this is a Labour hit, we've got the assisted dying bill, of course, which we're talking about today, and so that is obviously going to absorb a lot of airtime and
a good day to bury bad news, as we might remember
exactly
from the past 9/11, the famous phrase used by a Labour PR spinner.
That's right.
About on the day of the horrific events on 9/11, it was a good day to get out anything we want to bury.
Yeah, so there's a bit of that, and there's also, as you were just saying, there are quite a few big decisions coming up. Even in the next week, there are settlements to be sorted out with some of the, deprivatisation, that's not the right word, some of the renationalisation of some of the railways. So I guess if they wanted rid of her, then they maybe wanted to do it before that, before she had to handle that, let's say.
Absolutely. Do go on to Telegraph website and app to read Gordon's coverage. Gordon, as you say, you're writing about some of these aspects of the story. I think you're absolutely right. I think there has been a significant shift in Labour, that it has done too much which has been seen as back to the 1970s, too left-wing. And I think Keir Starmer has realised, or has certainly been told, you're being too indulgent.
Yep.
You are not showing that this government is about the future, not about harking back to a socialist past. And I think Louise Haigh, this was almost in a way quite useful for Keir Starmer to be able to have a moment when he could think, do you know what? I think we could put I could do something here which would be quite useful for the broader story of the government.
And you've got a theory as to who might be in his crosshairs next, don't you?
Well, I'm just interested. I'm hearing from some inside Labour circles that Ed Miliband, not in terms of being in his crosshairs, but that Ed Miliband and the whole net zero debate is sitting in this rather awkward pot, like public sector pay increases, like new rules for workers, that the polling is showing inside Labour is going down like the proverbial cup of cold sick, that the public do not like it. They're going to have to do something pretty aggressive on the zero emissions vehicle mandate, which is going to be embarrassing for the green agenda that Keir Starmer has put himself, sort of hung his coat on as being a great thing that this Labour government is going to do. The public don't like it. His polling is collapsing. Ed, I think it's not a question of him going, but it is a question of, Ed, you're going to need to calm down a bit.